This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio and the Overseas Radio Network. This is Technology Friday, so my guest via electronic connection is my nephew, Nick Finzer, the CEO of Internet Totality LLC in St. Petersburg, Florida. And we've been talking about all kinds of government spying. Now let's talk about another kind of spying. Documents reveal that TSA research proposals to body scan pedestrians and train passengers. Giving Transportation Security Administration agents a peek under your clothes may soon be a practice that goes well beyond airport checkpoints. Newly uncovered documents show that as early as 2006, the Department of Homeland Security, or the Gestapo, the Sicherheitsdienst, I guess is actually more apt, has been planning pilot programs to deploy mobile scanning units that can be set up at public events and in train stations, along with mobile X-ray vans capable of scanning pedestrians on city streets. One project allocated at Northwestern University in Siemens would mount backscatter X-ray scanners and video cameras on roving vans, along with other cameras on buildings and utility poles, to monitor groups of pedestrians, assess what they carried, and even track their eye movements and probably get retina scans, I suppose. In another program, the researchers were asked to develop a system of long-range X-ray scanning to determine what metal objects an individual might have on his or her body at distances of up to 30 feet. It almost makes me want to go out and get a suit made out of chainmail just to screw them up. So, Nick, what about this?
Well, and the article goes on to say that initially, DHS responded with a quote, TSA has not tested the advanced imaging technology that is currently used at airports in mass transit environments and does not have plans to do so. But when the journalist pressed for more information, they actually did admit to testing the scans on train passengers. So, just another example of them just completely lying and talking out of both sides of their mouth. What I want to know about this is I don't see any way that driving around in vans and shooting me with X-rays and backscatter, whatever those things are called, is not a violation of my right to be secure in my person, paper, and effects. This is pretty ludicrous.
Well, you certainly have a presumption of privacy. And the other thing is that they from what I read, in another story, these backscatter X-ray vans use really powerful X-rays.
Well, exactly.
And in all the illnesses I've had a heck of a lot of X-rays, and it seems to me like every time they get ready to run the X-ray machine, not using very much power, everybody runs and hides behind, a lead wall to make sure that they don't get damaged by exposure to the X-rays. And yet the federal government, which has an FDA that goes and pours chlorine on people's farm dinners, is indiscriminately already using these vans. They've tested them in a couple of places, driving down city streets and shooting people with them.
Right. Well, shooting people with radiation, including X-rays, actually can lead to a skin disease called radiation dermatitis, which happens a lot to people getting radiation therapy for cancer and whatnot. It can lead lesions on the skin and hair loss and stuff like that. Prolonged exposure to this stuff, especially if they're doing a high radiation dosage or amount or whatever. If they're planning on doing, especially if they plan on doing this on a regular basis or on a permanent basis, this is a huge this is assault and possibly battery. They're hitting you with things that are harmful and dangerous to you. Thomas Edison, when he was working on improving X-rays, and his assistant, he actually lost his arms due to overexposure of X-rays and ultimately died from it. These things are dangerous. That's why you wear lead when you get an X-ray, and why everyone hides behind a wall, like you said. So I think this is criminal.
Now, this is the same government, however, that stopped necessary hydro dam projects for one little fish called the snail darter, and won't let people drain swamps, and won't let people kill alligators that are eating their cattle and their dogs and everything else, but is indiscriminately actually zapping with ray guns. I mean, if you think about it, they're big ray guns right out of Star Wars. They're zapping innocent people for no damn good reason at all.
Well, that's right. And, and people might say you don't have an expectation of privacy out in public, but you have a certain expectation of privacy. I mean, yeah, they can pick up the rays of light that are bouncing off your body and see what you're doing, but to actually shoot you with something and to see what you're concealing under your clothes is completely unconstitutional and just ridiculous.
Well, it smacks of a mindset that runs across the whole government, which is actually totally anti-human. They are more concerned about bear cubs. There was a story, I think, on Scott and Tim's show today about a bear cub that I listened about, and they're worried about that. They're worried about species dying when throughout all of history and prehistory, species always die off. That's part of nature. I'm glad the dinosaurs died off. And yet they're really, this is almost like something out of Hitler. I mean, I don't know if any of you remember the movie The Boys from Brazil, which I think Anthony Quinn played Dr. Mengele, and they had cloned little Hitlers. And, all the experiments they did on the Jews in the camps. I mean, what's the difference between taking a Jew in a concentration camp and subjecting them to, well, not radiation then, but they were subjecting them to, like, drinking seawater and seeing how cold they could make them and all kinds of other experiments? What's the difference fundamentally or morally or legally between that and the indiscriminate use of powerful X-rays that are proven to be dangerous? I mean, you can't get hardly any drugs without a prescription in the United States, and the FDA limits what they can say on vitamins and on natural things that you eat, and yet they're going around, we don't know where, and if they're watching you in particular, it's entirely likely that someone might be getting ultimately lethal doses of X-rays if they're parked outside your house and shooting you day and night, right?
Right. Well, I think it's time to upgrade the tinfoil hat to a lead one.
I mean, it seems like, I've always said technology is morally neutral. I remember years ago in a speech I gave, and we were talking about technology, and in that case, we're talking about guns. And I said a gun is morally neutral. I said when it's used to commit a crime, then it's used for immoral purposes. When it's used to, kill communists and free people, then it's a moral good. And the technology itself is morally neutral, but in this seems to be an entire abuse of technology that's entirely unrestrained and is subject to what I can see no oversight.
Yeah, I don't think we really know what oversight, if any, there is. It's really bad.
Well, it's scary. I mean, it really is scary, and it seems like that the amount of intrusion into personal lives through technology is no longer increasing arithmetically, but is increasing geometrically. And what's going to happen next? They're going to find, I'm sure, if we know they have this much, what do they have that we don't know about?
I don't know, but I also want to remind everybody about these backscatter things, which were proved to be easy to defeat also. So I'm not sure that there's going to be any real gain anyway. They're just going to be poisoning everybody.
Well, it's like the good thing about free enterprise, as it still exists, is like with the passports that have these RFID chips that are only supposed to be readable within 30 feet. So, of course, the government's lying, but there's a whole business of people who have made envelopes to carry your passports in that block the RFID rays.
Right, the Faraday cages.
So, I guess in that way it's good for free enterprise, but it's certainly bad for liberty. Now we're almost out of time in this segment as well. These are great topics, but we'll be back in 3.5 minutes. This is David Finzer with Nick Finzer on Truth and Lies Radio, talking about technology and how it affects your freedom on the Overseas Radio Network. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio on the Overseas Radio Network. And we're here with my nephew, Nick Finzer of Internet Totality, LLC. And we've been talking about technology and freedom and how the government is messing up our lives with technology and some ways maybe defeat it. Latest interesting thing, the MD5 password scrambler is considered no longer safe. The MD5 password hash algorithm is no longer considered safe by the original software developer a day after the leak of more than 6.4 million hashed LinkedIn passwords. And I could tell it was hacked because I started getting some weird LinkedIn messages. The original author of the MD5 password hash algorithm has publicly declared his software end of life and is, quote, no longer considered safe, unquote, to use on commercial websites. Now, to start with, Nick, what the hell is a hash algorithm?
Okay, well, a hash algorithm it's a way of turning a password string into encrypted text. But what's different about a hash from other forms of cryptography is it's one way. There's no way to take the hash and undo it into the plain text or the clear text.
Okay.
So that's, the way you have to attack these things then is you have to know how the algorithm works, which is not a big feat. These things are published. And so then you take every word or everything you want to try to test the password, and you run it through the MD5 algorithm, and you compare the results. And that's how these things are checked. There's no way to reverse engineer what the password is from the MD5 hash.
Okay. Now, this being no longer safe and no longer good for use of commercial websites, what are the implications of that, and who's using this besides LinkedIn?
Well, apparently, I'm sure a lot of people are using it. It's been around for a while. These things do happen where password algorithms become unsecure just based on improvements in technology. Like we talked about several weeks ago when we were talking about passwords, that password security is a function of how long it will take someone with modern hardware to go through all the possibilities and find what your password is. And like I said then, with modern hardware, an 8-character MD5 password can be done in under 3 days. And that's exactly what the article said, or one of the articles on this said. And that was the problem. And so somehow, their password list got out in MD5 format. And, whoever it was that hacked it and got the list obviously started going through. And there's 2 ways to do this. One is brute forcing, which is what I just said, where you try a bunch of words, you convert them into the MD5, and you compare them and find which one is the password. Or the faster way is they've already done this in advance, and they have what's called lookup tables or rainbow tables. And so then they already have a list. This MD5 hash is this password. And they have thousands or millions of those in a table, and they just look for your password, and boop, there's the clear text. We know what this is, especially for easy passwords like password or well-known things like that.
Okay. So the longer the password still is, the better.
This still applies, yes. The longer the password, the better. Now, one of the things LinkedIn didn't do somewhat irresponsibly is they didn't do a practice called salting the password, which is where you add into the user's password behind the scenes a little bit of more characters that are they're not exactly random, but they're different for every user based on some sort of other algorithm, which makes the lookup tables useless. And they didn't do that, which is why I said that you can't trust these third parties with your passwords. You have to assume that there's a good chance it's going to be broken and take steps to guard yourself, such as using different passwords on different websites. If you had your LinkedIn password broken and you use the same password for Facebook, these hackers almost certainly have your Facebook account now too. So you're going to want to go through and change all your passwords that are like that. Okay.
Well, I use different levels of passwords for, different things. I mean, for anything really important, mine's 57 characters long.
Yeah. I think you'll be safe until we get into quantum computing with that one, most likely.
Okay. And other things I don't that aren't very important. I don't know how much damage they can do with my LinkedIn account.
Right. Well, I do the same thing. I have different levels of passwords. I've even been known to reuse one or two on occasion for unimportant things, but that's not recommended. It's certainly not recommended for very important things. Depends on how much you care about your Facebook and people being able to impersonate you to your friends. But yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you something I've always wondered about. It is a little off topic, but when I go in, I do all my banking online. And in several of the banks, the first thing you put in the username and a password, and then they come up with a picture. And if I don't recognize the picture, I shouldn't put in the password.
Right. I think Bank of America pioneered that.
Okay. Does that help? Does that mean anything? Or is that just something to make us feel comfortable and doesn't mean much?
Well, you would think it would mean something, but last I saw, the studies actually showed that it was completely useless and really just security theater, because someone did a test. I forgot who it was, but they found that even if the image wasn't correct, and the whole point is to prevent phishing, right? So, which is where they set up a fake Bank of America page to get your information. The idea being, if you don't see the image you selected, you don't put in your password.
Right.
So the security mechanism is in place. The problem is the study showed that people didn't care. Even if the wrong image showed up, they still put in their password. So it's a failing of human psychology or something, but it makes sense technically, but it just last I saw, it didn't actually do anything for most people. Now that does exist, so keep that in mind. If you have a bank that uses that, if you don't see the right picture, don't put in your password. But apparently people don't actually do that.
Well, they also come. I notice if I use a different browser, they'll come back and ask me. In addition, they'll usually ask me for one of the security questions.
Well, that's because once you log in successfully, they give you a cookie in your browser that says that you've logged in before, so don't show the security questions. And since cookies aren't shared between different browsers on the same computer, if you log in with a different browser, you could see the security questions if it doesn't have that cookie already set.
Okay, now back to this password issue. As I understand it, the most important thing is just length. So, for example, even if you're terrible, like our attorney who can't remember his passwords and occasionally has to call me on the encrypted line to find out what his password is, you could use, for example, a verse of poetry that you liked, or a Bible verse if it was long enough or whatever, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even now that MD5, and actually MD5 was said to be unsecure 5 years ago or more, just because it's weaker mathematically, so we knew that technology was going to be caught up to the point where we could break it easily. If you use a long enough password, you're still going to be pretty safe. I mean, because they're still going to have to go through all these different characters, and it doesn't, I mean, you might think of it as words, but on the technical side, every letter, number, space, or dot is another key, another notch on the lock of your password, that you're still going to be pretty safe, regardless of, any negligence or accidents on the side of the website that you're using. So long passwords are the way to go. Poetry is a good way to remember it. And if you run a website, have your developers get away from MD5 and use SHA-1 or 2, which are the more common thing, the more modern things.
Okay, now in PGP, I get a little bit off the subject, but in PGP they give you different kinds of encryption you can use.
Right.
What's the best of the choices?
Well, you have to pick a couple different choices with PGP. One's your I forgot what's technically called, but it's your reversible encryption, and I think AES is, I think, currently the strongest one. It stands for Advanced Encryption System, I think.
Okay.
And you also get asked for a hashing algorithm, which I don't remember exactly how it uses that, but obviously you don't want to pick MD5 now. You get the choice of several. I think you get SHA as one of them, and that's the one I would pick. So I would go with AES and SHA if I was using PHP or PGP.
Okay, and these are things that if people are going to work online and do their banking, I mean, I do all of my banking online. I don't even here locally in Serbia, of course, they don't even have checks, so it's all done online, and so that makes it even more important to have, I guess, the right passwords. Yeah. And
your password is a strong password is the key to your digital life, whatever it may be. If it's your bank or your Facebook, either way, this is about the only thing that stands between your data and the outside world.
Okay, and so someone who uses a stupid password is really asking for it. I mean, they're setting themselves up as a mark to be cheated, to be impersonated, whatever.
Well, I don't know, maybe not a mark per se, but definitely the low-hanging fruit.
Okay, we have to stop now at the end of the show. Unfortunately, it keeps on going, but thanks a lot, Nick, for joining us. And all of this comes down to America is becoming less safe, more dangerous every day, which is why I say expatriate your assets so you can expatriate yourself and have something left. Because remember, you only have 3 choices left. Give up and live like a serf, fight back, or get out. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio and the Overseas Radio Network.